About the proposal to create an international anti-corruption court. Today, and in partnership with the Hague Business Agency. The Anti-Corruption Court, or IACC, is a global problem that investigates the Panama Papers and numerous later reports have demonstrated is a persistent, if not growing, issue. Integrity has led all for a number of years, and over the past year by growing and experts from over 80 countries, including more than 40 former presidents and prime ministers and over 30 Nobel laureates, have signed a declaration calling for the court. III is now working closely with the government of Canada and the Netherlands, which have made foreign public policy commitments to work towards creating the court. The past two presidents of Colombia have endorsed the idea, and President Buhari of Nigeria suggested in July that the ICC is needed. But why is grand corruption such a significant problem? And how would the ICC work? To address these issues, these questions and more, we are joined today by several leaders of the effort to create the court. Professor Slagiana Taseva is member of the Academic Advisory Board of the International Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna, Austria, former committee member of the Afghanistan International Anti-Corruption Monitoring and Evaluation Committee, first president of the State Anti-Corruption Commission of North Macedonia, and establisher and chair of Transparency International Macedonia. Maya Groff, Esquire, is an international lawyer based in The Hague and co-chair of the International Coordinating Committee of the IACC campaign. Additionally, she is convener of the Climate Governance Commission, and as a principal legal officer, she has previously worked on the development and administration of multiple multilateral treaties, as well as at international criminal tribunals. Wim Jansen is the Director for International Affairs of the Hague Municipality. As such, he is responsible for the coordination within the municipality of its international activities, especially in the area of peace, justice, and security. His unit especially cooperates with international organizations, NGOs in these areas, as well as with knowledge centers, universities, technology startups, and the government. He previously was active in international cooperation within the Ministries of Economic Affairs. So welcome all. To start, Maya. Corruption can take many forms and can mean many different things to different people. Can you help us understand what the term grand corruption means and why we should care about grand corruption as a global problem?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Misha. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you to discuss this really important issue. So grand corruption, in broad terms, is or can be defined as the abuse of public office, high-level public office for private gain. So this might involve, for example, bribery, embezzlement, misappropriation of property, money laundering, etc., by high-level government officials. And it's grand corruption because it's done at such a high scale and involves large sums of money. So also in terms of the total amount of money lost in the global economy to corruption each year, we know it's really vast quantities. For example, the World Economic Forum has estimated between 3 and 4 trillion per year. So we're talking about very large sums of money that are lost to the public, to the global public. So in individual nations, you can imagine if you're a citizen in a country where grand corruption is flourishing, public infrastructure, roads, health services, education, there will be deprivation of the basic provision of these services due to the grand corruption. Then if you look at the international level, all of this adds up, where the conclusion and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, tackling climate change, ecological crises, etc., fighting pandemics will all be undermined by the presence of grand corruption, which is unfortunately flourishing in too many nations around the world. Then also there are cross-border effects of grand corruption, destabilizing democracies, human rights at the international level, as well as peace and security. So this really has spillover effects for all of the international community.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Maya. Slagjana, you have extensive experience as a practitioner involved in the evolution of international treaties, including the UN Convention Against Corruption. Can you give us a brief history of what has already been done to fight grand corruption and what more needs to be done now, such as creating an international anti-corruption court?
Thank you, Michal. If you look at the international architecture for the fight against corruption, and especially for the fight against grand corruption, it seems very comprehensive and very extensive, with different international treaties, including the International Anti-Corruption Convention. It is the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is signed and ratified by many, but by all countries in the world, I would say. And then we have the regional anti-corruption treaties. We have the International Anti-Money Laundering, which are based on the FATF Financial Action Task Force activities, or 40 recommendations that provide the ground for the peer review and evaluation of each country, whether they are prepared to follow the money flows, or because we know when we are talking about the corruption, all the money are not staying in the states where they are embezzled, but they go to other countries where they find safe havens. So we talk about anti-money laundering in connection to the anti-corruption. And when we look in the international institutions, international treaties, international forums, that has all been transformed into the national arena. We have in every national state, we have the anti-corruption laws, we have the anti-money laundering institutions, we have anti-corruption courts and prosecution, and that is all created on the basis of the international standards. But what we all see now, and we have all agreed that all this is not effective when we want to talk about effectiveness in the fight against corruption. When we look at the figures or numbers of the seizures or confiscation of the money that have been laundered and that have been embezzled from the developing countries and have been laundered and placed in some other regions, as it has been also revealed by the Panama Papers, which you mentioned in the introduction, we see that the whole system, which was created in the past 30 years, is inefficient and ineffective when we want to speak about the real fight against corruption. And that's why I think that the International Anti-Corruption Court is addressing exactly the problem of ineffectuality of the existing international instruments for the fight against corruption, because we need to go and further recognize that any case of grand corruption, regardless of where it originates, involves transnational networks or professional enablers from numerous jurisdictions. So all this needs a global response that will be really focused on effectiveness in the fight, because as it was mentioned earlier, corruption is not a victimless crime. Many people, citizens of developing countries, are victims of corruption because they cannot get the services that they should get from the corrupt governments. And the final point, the ineffectiveness of this anti-corruption architecture or networks is mainly due to the lack of the political will. So we really need to find something that will present the real political will for the fight against corruption and will go beyond it when it comes to the effectiveness in the investigations and all the activities to take the money back.
Yeah, very true. It's we can see now that grand corruption is an urgent problem, and that negatively impacts human rights and democracy, efforts to fight climate change, pandemics, and as you mentioned before, and as Slagjana also mentioned right now, the problem very often is ineffectiveness of existing systems. But how would the IACC work in practice? And how would it contribute to addressing the problem of ineffectiveness, for example?
Yes, absolutely, Misha. So as Slagjana noted, there's already wide, broad-ranging consensus among virtually every state in the world about definitions of corruption and how important it is to combat corruption. The gap that Slagjana pointed out is really the enforcement gap and the political will gap. So the IACC would build on this strong international consensus on corruption, something to combat together and ensure that there's another layer of enforcement of these anti-corruption laws when national officials are unable or unwilling to prosecute. So, for example, there are countries that are in transition. Administrations have been elected on a strong anti-corruption platform, but they lack the resources to prosecute the high-level corruption that they need to prosecute. So IACC would only step in when a state would be unwilling or unable to prosecute the high-level officials. So it would be constituted to ensure that it would be a neutral forum to fairly and effectively prosecute high-level officials as a last resort. It would work by deterrence. There would finally be a credible threat of prosecution. At the moment, there's simply impunity for the high-level officials and their enablers around the world. There's really no credible threat of prosecution. Also, the court is envisioned to really recover, repatriate, and/or repurpose the stolen assets from countries for the benefit of citizens and those affected by the corruption. And also, the court, the philosophy, the way we've been developing it so far is really to have the very expert investigators, prosecutors, and judges of the IACC available to the countries and the national authorities to support them in their efforts to fight corruption at the national level. So very complementary to existing national efforts.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I wanted to ask you, Wim, because obviously on the national level and how national becomes involved in international. So Maya and Slagjana have made compelling cases that grand corruption has many devastating consequences and that there is a clear lack of accountability for corrupt leaders and their co-conspirators in many places. And Canada and the Netherlands have both committed now to working with international partners to establishing the IACC and are hosting a high-level roundtable at the end of November here in The Hague. where the IACC will be a topic of discussion. The city of The Hague has also been heavily engaged in supporting the IACC, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about why it is important for governments like the Netherlands to support the IACC initiative, and what more you think needs to happen to make the creation of such a court a reality.
Yeah, thank you, Monsieur. And also for having us here. Well, I simply agree that it's a compelling case. I think it's very clear that we need to tackle this problem of grant corruption. And if you look at the problems in the Netherlands for the enforcement of the measures against Russia now, you will see that we are long overdue and we need to step up our initiatives. What needs to happen is a complex question. I think the one thing that we can do in the Netherlands, and that's true for us as a municipality, but also for the ministry, is to create constituencies. I think the court, as has been thought up, needs constituency in governments. And you refer to the high-level roundtable that should be instrumental in engaging governments. At the end, it's the governments around the world that will have to sign a treaty in which they provide a mandate and a legal basis, but also the finance for the court. Budgets are tight at the moment, and there's competition. There's a war going on, not so far from the Netherlands in Ukraine, and a tribunal for the Ukraine may also get a lot of attention and a lot of priority, but you can't do everything and you can't finance everything. So we will really have to build a constituency and the priority for this new court. And I, as an economist, I'm probably the only non-lawyer in this group. I see that going after kleptocrats may be very effective. And that lacks in the current mandates and jurisdictions and jurisprudence. The ecosystem that we have in The Hague consists of a lot of organizations and courts, but it's just not sufficient. And we need an addition to ICC, ICJ, PCA, and that would be the IACC. We as a municipality, we can assist in all kinds of ways. At the end, we could even try to provide housing or international schools for the judges' children. For the moment, what we could do was help III with connections to many peoples in the Hague ecosystem, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that kind of constituency can also help. A lot of organizations in The Hague are critical towards the current mandates of the ICC. We can help to avoid mistakes. I'm, for instance, very happy that Maya has been talking about capacity building also in other countries. It's not just the court in The Hague, a big building with a lot of people working at that here, but also support the nations that are the victim. And we can provide a soft landing here. So that's what we can do.
Yeah,
thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, actually, I have a follow-up question for you in that regard, because you mentioned other initiatives taking place as part of the campaign for the International Anti-Corruption Court. Yeah. And this is a question for all of you, but I just wanted to follow up with you first, Wim. So creating any international court and institution in general is a long-term endeavor. It takes time to set something like that up. In the shorter term, how do you think a campaign for the creation of the IACC can help spur other reforms and solutions at the national and international levels that can also help counter grant corruption in the meantime?
Well, what you see is that the attention for the current debate already helps others to try to improve. The response of the courts in The Hague to the Ukraine crisis has been much faster and immediate than we've seen before. And so maybe the talking about things that need to happen from out this group also helps to spur others. The discussions in The Hague constituency on why the ICC could be more effective is really important, and it's been ongoing for years, but it needs to get the attention of the governments. They are the ones that could, as I already said, could change and should change mandates, can add institutions or change mandates. And this debate needs to be much more political. This is where, it's a sad, convenient crisis. We have a war in Ukraine and you would rather not have it, but it does help in helping people realizing that what we have now is not sufficient, and this political debate is really important. We've got a few meetings in The Hague with ministers of foreign affairs on what should happen in response to Ukraine, and that really helps. And I guess putting a possible IACC, a Grant Corruption Court, on this agenda also is very important and timely. So I hope that's the answer to your question. But it's a complicated question.
Yes, absolutely.
And creating a court is also very complicated. I know from my colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs what it took to create an ICC. And we can be critical towards the ICC, but what it took to create it, that's also an interesting lesson. But you know much more about that, Maya.
Would you like to follow up on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this sort of catalytic effect, we hope in bringing the IACC proposal forward to the international community to really think carefully about, the systemic effects of grand corruption. And as Wim was saying, the terrible war in Ukraine has highlighted even further the importance of this issue. But even before the war, I know, countries have put corruption on their national security agendas as a priority item. So this is truly important for the international community. And indeed, it is a lot of work to create a new international tribunal, both to create it and then also to run it and to improve it, and to constantly review it to make sure it's an effective institution serving its purpose. Indeed, this is a lot of labor and cooperative work too. I know that very well, but it's a labor of love and of necessity that we absolutely have to work together to get a handle on these big issues because of the resource drain, because of the multiple implications: security, human rights, education, environment, etc. And just one point before Slagjana hopefully chimes in also on this point is that we think that the IACC is a vital and one important part of the solution for our sort of serious corruption problems at the international level, but it's not the only solution. There should be in parallel all sorts of other efforts, all the work that's already ongoing. But there's also really key international issues that have to be addressed in tandem, we would hope. For example, the issues of shell companies around the world and facilitated in various jurisdictions, tax havens, which needs huge international cooperation, collaboration, public procurement laws and processes in various countries, and ongoing work at the national level. Also in the big financial centers that have been enabling grand corruption cross-border, which really have to think about this carefully in terms of their national approach. So again, it's part of ongoing systematic sort of issues to get a handle on this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Slagjana can also really contribute to that part. So do you have anything particular about how this campaign, how the awareness around grand corruption can result in positive changes in the meantime?
In my view, it is already resulting in positive changes because it has already steered a discussion about how the system can be, or the whole international addressing of this corruption problem and anti-money laundering. And more often we are talking now the financial flows or illicit financial flows, because this issue was left kind of behind. And the main problem of all these existing instruments, and as I said, international architecture, was that they were all working in silos. They were all just looking at their own area of work. What is anti-money laundering stays there, but we have some occasional talking about typology of money laundering when it comes from the corruption offenses. But now we see these activities or many initiatives to bringing the things together. So this is where the International Anti-Corruption Court, because it will all be needed, they will all be needed for the International Anti-Corruption Court to work effectively, as Maya mentioned some of those. So we can use the networks from the Egmont group, which is operational group for the following the money in the anti-money laundering world, or the work of the anti-corruption agencies, which exchange information for the assets of the public officials and to track those assets. So there are many things going on, and now these activities are kind of linking together, and it need to be More effort need to be done in order to link them all together, but I think this International Anti-Corruption Court initiative has steered this discussion, because we are talking more often about the ineffectiveness and working in silos and what need to be done. And it is all based on the political discussions. And after 20 years of existing of all these international treaties or bodies or mechanisms, they need to be revisited and revised if they have not given any result when we talk about the effectiveness. And when we talk about corruption, it is mainly about bringing the money back to the people where they belong. And it is about seizure and confiscation and assets recovery, which is very complicated, legally complicated path that goes through the borders. And for that, we need a solid international institutions, which International Court, Anti-Corruption Court can create.
All right, thank you for that, Slaviana. Very interesting. I personally come from the civil society, have a civil society background, and I, now working on the campaign, can also notice very, very well that just talking about it and raising awareness around grant corruption can empower civil society as well to work towards a common goal and have the prospect of an IACC there. So that's also, I think, an advantage of the campaign itself. But, you know, talking about an IACC, it sounds like a beautiful idea and fascinating prospects. But I think Maya and maybe Slaviana as well can also answer this. Why would a country led by corrupt leaders join the court? Or if they don't, how could they be held accountable?
Yes, absolutely. Very good question. So firstly, as envisioned now, there should be jurisdictional links to third jurisdictions or foreign jurisdictions through which money is laundered, so where parts of the corruption crimes are committed. So there should be mechanisms within the court to take jurisdiction over high-level officials if part of their crime is committed on the jurisdiction of parties to the IACC statute. So right. If there are indeed financial centers where through which money is laundered, for example, this should give the court robust, jurisdictional reach. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, there are many countries in transition that really need the support and help of an international enforcement mechanism. So we expect, many states in that category to support and join the court's statute. Also, what one sees, for example, with the creation of the International Criminal Court, other sort of groundbreaking new international treaties and institutions, once the norms are created, once the institution and the treaty is drafted, it has a momentum of its own where many, many more countries, around the world and in diverse jurisdictions really get excited about a helpful new tribunal and will join just as a matter of momentum, especially with international pressure and national pressure. As you mentioned, civil society was extremely active with the creation of the ICC and then getting, the really incredible ratifications of the Rome Statute. And we expect this to be the case also for the IACC because it fulfills such a vital interest for populations of countries around the world.
Right. Slaviana, I'm also interested on your take on this, coming from North Macedonia. I think you're perhaps one of the countries that Maya mentioned as being sort of on the fence, in transition in that sense. What do you think about this?
Yeah, Macedonia is one of the countries, together with other countries in the region, which is named as the Western Balkans region, facing with a problem with corruption through this transition time. We are already 30 years in transition. And what we have seen is that for all the time, the political elites, they change in power, one or the others. We don't have different political parties or many of them different to choose during the elections. And they always put the anti-corruption very high on their programs when they talk about elections, and they are promising. But as we look at the indicators, including Corruption Perception Index and European Union progress reports, the problem with corruption is worsening in this region. And it is not becoming better, even though we have all these institutions. We have an independent anti-corruption agencies, state auditors, whistleblower protection laws. We have everything what we need. We are evaluated by Manival and Greco, saying that everything is in place, just effectiveness is missing and implementation. And it is not only this region. When we look globally, we see also in other parts of the globe this problem with effectiveness and implementation and accountability and high level of impunity. The only way that politicians will react here is that they will put it on the agenda because it will look good. But they will not. They will hope that it will not work for them. It will be for somebody else. But what we need is that we need to really raise awareness that it is one of the venues. It might be one of the lights in the tunnel for 30 years living in this. It is even officially proclaimed to be captured state. So even this need to be something to increase the interest of the public and politicians to do something different. And it should not be left only to the national leaders to decide. It should be really international reaction to all this if we want to create a better world that will address the sustainable development goals and all this, our targets for the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, Wim?
I'd like to add something. It's interesting to look at the changes in my country. We are now a frontrunner, try to be. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs leads with the Canadians in meetings that would support the IACC. But when I started working in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, we had an official policy that corruption was a problem of the other countries, and if Dutch companies provided the bribe, they would be able to deduct it for tax purposes. And a lot has changed there. We have realized to a certain extent that policies for taxation that were maybe aimed to stimulate innovation had the effect of facilitating fraud and grand corruption, and now we are trying to remedy that in an OECD context, but also in establishing a court. So a lot has changed in the Netherlands, and this is partly because of the kind of campaign that we are running. Yeah. So it's good to see that.
A little bit of pressure here and there is good.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think, would you like to contribute? Is there anything else that you would like to add to this topic? Or I think we've covered a lot today already. So thank you for everyone for watching, and thank you Maya, Wim and Slagiana for your valuable contributions today. A special thank you to the Humanity Hub for organizing the Just Peace Month, and to our partners, the Hague Business Agency, for making this possible. Thank you.
Thank you.